There's been a lot of iconic duos throughout pop culture history, from Han Solo and Chewbacca, to Captain Kirk and Spock, to Shrek and Donkey. But one thing that most of these duos have in common is that they're typically comprised of a more quiet or silent type, and then a very talkative character. And last year, the MCU did their best to add yet another duo to this list of icons in a very similar vein. And I'm of course referring to Deadpool's Marvel Cinematic Universe debut. And Deadpool and Wolverine absolutely set the box office on fire when it dropped in theaters last July, and in my opinion was pretty easily the movie of the summer. But now that we're almost an entire year removed from the initial release hype, I want to look back and analyze the film itself, because I think the polar opposite nature of these characters that make them such an entertaining duo also created a bit of a clash within the film itself narratively. Now, back in August of last year, I made a video titled "Deadpool and Wolverine is great, but also terrible," and I caught a lot of flack in the comments of that video, but I still stand by my initial assessment because this was 100% a film that was built to be a spectacle. If you're just looking for flashy fight sequences, funny dialogue, and entertainment, this is the movie for you, and I totally understand why people really loved it. But personally, while I do like all of the stuff I just listed, I also put a lot of value on having a well-told, emotionally engaging story and character arcs. And this is where the film faltered a bit for me. Since this Wolverine and Deadpool are variants and not really the versions of the characters that we had grown to love over the years, I think the movie should have tried much harder to make us really care about these versions specifically. Like, Deadpool's character arc of wanting to be part of a team does absolutely nothing for me, because A, we literally ended Deadpool 2 with Wade having finally formed a team, and B, it's just super cheesy. And honestly, I would have loved some kind of flashback sequence where we got to see what happened to this Wolverine's X-Men. Show us why he's so depressed, don't just tell us in passing. But regardless of my issues with the film, I think this struggle of trying to balance telling a cohesive story with being a fun, action-packed spectacle is driven by who these characters are at their core. Wolverine has always been a tragic character with so many iconic, heart-wrenching moments on the big screen. From getting to see glimpses throughout X2 of the torture he endured in the Weapon X program, to watching him have to kill the woman he loved in The Last Stand, to his heroic sacrifice and tear-inducing death scene in Logan. Even in the bad X-Men movies, Wolverine has some kind of emotional turmoil going on. And this is perhaps the most integral aspect of this legendary protagonist. He is a character built through pain and suffering, and is inherently complex because not even he knows all of his past. Deadpool, on the other hand, at least in his first two feature-length outings, had a rather straightforward story. In Deadpool 1, we primarily got a revenge story where he killed Francis for fucking up his face and ruining his relationship, and in Deadpool 2 we saw a race to try to stop Russell from becoming a villain. And I think Marvel looked at the simplicity of these two stories and decided to double down in the third film, as the main narrative is really Deadpool just trying to save his timeline and finally become part of the team. And I think this was done because A, in order to get these two characters together, you're gonna have to pull some time travel shenanigans, so you kinda have to play it a little loose with the story, and B, what most people love about Deadpool are his jokes and cool fight sequences. So by focusing on getting him into these fun scenarios where he can interact with a bunch of other characters, you maximize what people want out of him. But at the same time, you don't want to just leave Wolverine out to dry, so they gave him a dark backstory of being the worst Wolverine, and sort of in passing let us know that everyone he's ever held near and dear is dead and gone. And I view this as a half measure. I think Marvel, given the nature of both of these characters, felt like they could either make a gritty, self-contained story, a story that frankly suited Wolverine more, or a wild, really fun film that suited Deadpool more. And ultimately, they definitely leaned more to the Deadpool side of things, and just sprinkled in some narrative beats here and there for this Wolverine. But despite this, one of the most common things I've seen said about this movie is that it serves as a touching farewell to the Fox Marvel universe. And to me, this decision to go for spectacle at the cost of narrative actually makes the film the exact opposite. The majority of the Fox Marvel films are not built on spectacle at all. Take X-Men First Class for example. That movie at its core is the story of two friends who grew to love each other as brothers, but due to their vastly different past experiences, which shaped their outlooks on life, they ultimately go their separate ways and become eternally stuck on opposite sides of the struggle for mutant survival. Even in Deadpool 1 and 2, while yes, the story is very simple in both, we actually had emotionally rich subplots for Deadpool in each. In the sequel, Wade just wants to join Vanessa in death because he blames himself for letting her die. But the sick irony of his power set is that it is almost impossible for him to die. And by the end of the film, when it looks like he'll finally get to join Vanessa on the other side, she tells him to go back because the family he had developed throughout the film still needs him. And to me, this was the strength of the Fox Marvel movies when they were firing on all cylinders. Granted, they also had their fair share of flops, I won't deny that, but if Deadpool and Wolverine was truly meant to be a thoughtful send-off for the Fox era, I really would have liked some kind of meaningful emotional subplot for Deadpool here. Like, I guess they tried to make one by having Vanessa break up with this version of Deadpool for being too much of a loser, but in comparison to what we got in most of the Fox Marvel films, that's just not it. So in my eyes, the MCU completely overlooked what made the Fox Marvel universe work for so long. Despite having an absolute mess of a timeline, we were on board because they made us truly care for a lot of their characters in a deep, personal way. And if I'm being honest, this is the biggest thing the MCU is currently lacking. So I would advise the powers that be to look at Deadpool 3 and realize that going for spectacle over narrative is a short-term outlook. Yes, the film was popular and entertaining and had us all talking about it for weeks, but what did it build to? Did it have any staying power? I think it's awesome to have a No Way Home or a Deadpool and Wolverine every once in a while, and I thoroughly enjoyed watching both. But if the MCU wants to succeed as a franchise moving forward, they need to swing the pendulum back into the direction of thinking narrative first. And almost a year later, this is ultimately my biggest takeaway from Deadpool and Wolverine. Well, if you made it this far, please let me know in the comments, what are your thoughts on Deadpool and Wolverine, now that we're almost a year removed? Do you still love it, or do you agree with some of the issues I touched upon? I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please feel free to subscribe for more Screen Stories content. Until next time, peace.